of a three-part series that I've been partnering with iHen to facilitate. And now, don't worry if this is the first one you've joined us for. You don't need any context from the previous two conversations, but it's been great. And so I would be remiss if I didn't start by thanking Corey and Rodney and Joe and just everyone who's a part of this career development committee for just allowing me to be a part of the resources that you're offering to your members. I know the integral role that the healthcare profession has always played, but is playing during this time. And so it's an honor and treat to be a part of the good work that you are doing. And my goodness, I was thinking to myself before we started today's conversation that there's no way that we would have known 6 months ago, which I think is about when we started planning out these conversations. We had no way of knowing that the timing of when this conversation would take place would be just days after Roe versus Wade was overturned, that we would be 3 months into a global war going on across the nation between Russia and Ukraine. And so I think now more than ever, this conversation has always been relevant, but I think it's just growing in relevancy as times change and evolve. The question, whereas I think if we brought this question up to you 10 years ago of should you ever be talking about politics in the workplace or on social media, I think the majority would be a resounding no. And I haven't looked at the poll responses from this group yet to see your gauge on it, but we're getting in a time where it's just not always as cut and dry expectations wise. And so I'm looking forward to not just sharing my thoughts with you on this conversation, but on this topic rather, but really having you join in the conversation. So if your background is safe or your desk clear enough and you feel comfortable, I do invite you to turn on your cameras and unmute your mics to your comfort level. And just to help us to do our best to help this to feel like we're in person and like we are connecting. We'll do some breakout groups and I'll be opening the floor for you to chat. And I would love to see your smiling faces. And it just helps us to feel like we are that we are actually together, even though some of you may not know I'm actually in Chicago facilitating this call. And so we're actually going to start. I'm going to break you out into small groups of, I think we can do 2 or 3 with the number that we have. You're going to have about 2 to 3 people in your group. And what I'm going to have you do is if you have a piece of paper on your desk, or if you're taking notes digitally, I just want you to take your paper and you're going to split it into 2 halves. So just fold it in half. And on one side, you're going to write the words, I am, ... And then on the other side, you will write, I am not. Okay, so you're dividing your paper into 2 distinct sides. And you're on one side, you're going to write, I am, and I'm actually going to be silent for just maybe 1 or 2 minutes. I want you to think of just 3 to 4 parts of your identity, 3 to 4 groups that you identify with. And you can go, any direction with that. So any parts of, of who you are that you feel are the biggest part of your identity. You won't necessarily be required to share this. So just any 3 to 4 pieces of your identity, you're gonna write that down, and then I'll give you the next set of instructions. And I saw at least 1 person come in since we started. So for anybody who's just joining, you're just taking 1 or 2 minutes and you're writing down 3 to 4 key pieces of your identity. All right. Now on the same sheet of paper, on the second side, you are going to write I am not. I am not. And I want you to think of what are some common assumptions that you imagine people make about people who are a part of the group that you identify with that that doesn't resonate. And I'm going to share my screen with you. If you see me looking to the left and to the right, it's because I have multiple screens here. And so I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see. So I know some people are more visual like me. And so these are a couple examples. The first woman is saying she's a very social person, but contrary to what most people believe, she's actually an introvert. Um, the man in the middle is saying he's over the age of 50, but he is quite technologically savvy. And then the third person is saying she's from New York, but she wants nothing to do with the Giants. And so I just want you to think about, with the identities that you wrote down that you identify with, I want you to think about what someone might assume about you based on those by you being a part of those parts of your identity, and then write down what may not apply to you. So we'll take 2 minutes to do that. And I've worked with enough healthcare executives to know that some of you are thinking, I just need you to tell me how to conduct myself on LinkedIn or how to establish my brand. Don't worry, there's a method to my madness. And so this will all connect. The dots will connect momentarily. Okay, so what we're going to do, we'll only be in groups for maybe about 5 minutes. So don't delay on deciding who's going to speak up first, but you're going to break into small groups. And I just ask that you share at least one of the 3 to 4 on your list that you feel most comfortable with. Hi, Joe, welcome. I'll have your group members loop you in on the activity that we're starting off with, but you don't have to share them all. Don't share anything you don't feel comfortable, but just provide one of your examples to your group by sharing, hey, my name is this and I am this, but I am not that. So we'll do that for about 5 minutes, and you'll see the invitation inviting you to a breakout room in just a moment, and then we'll come back as a group. And if there's anyone who is a part of your group and they say, oh, I just joined in a couple minutes late, just explain to them what's going on, and we'll go from there. All right, you should see your invitations for your breakout rooms popping in. And I'm watching to make sure everybody at least has one partner. So just hang tight. If your person doesn't show up to your room, one of us will drop in. Let's see if anybody. Okay, Rodney, it looks like Monte might be in a room by himself right now. So I don't know, Rodney, Sean, if one of you guys wanna, I think it doesn't throw us in a room as hosts. So if you wanna join in, Mark or Mela, if you have the ability, if you're here, if you can't, I know Mela, you might have just joined, but it's okay. Your group members can tee you in on the activity. So Sean or Rodney, do you guys want to hop in to the room with Monty?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, thank you. And then it also looks like Tara might be by herself. Rodney, do you want to join? That's room 2. And then I think I'll bounce in the other rooms to make sure everybody else. And maybe Mark and Mela might have stepped away. Oh no, Mela is in room 2 now, Rodney. So you're actually okay.
Okay.
I'm just gonna send out a reminder to everybody.
I think I may end up joining room 2 just to see.
Yeah, how it goes.
Yeah,
Please do.
yeah.
We got about 5 seconds before we have everyone back. All right. I think everyone is back. Before I give any context about the exercise, I do want to invite anyone to share. If there's anything that came up for you, even as you were thinking about putting your statements together or just in the conversation in your small group, I do want to invite space to just share what came up for you in your small group. Okay, and Joe, and yeah, thank you, Joe. Joe is saying, can I reiterate the prompting, because I know a couple people may have joined in late, and so we're just returning for anybody who's just joining us now. We're returning from breakout groups where I had everyone think about a piece, one of the biggest pieces of your cultural identity, and by cultural that may mean, for one of the examples I shared is someone may say, I'm very engaging in meetings, or if this sports team that my family really resonates with, or it might be my cultural identity. I'm a Black woman, whatever a piece of your cultural identity, and then you're writing a statement that says I am, but on the other side you're saying but I am not, and on that but I am not, you're speaking to what you believe to be a common assumption that people would make about you. And so in one of the examples I provided, the woman said, I am very engaging in meetings, but I am not an extrovert, which many people would likely be surprised about. And this exercise is so powerful for a number of reasons, because even when I do it with people who work together day in and day out, within these conversations, they things come up and people are saying, oh, I never knew this fact about you. And so one of the things I like to always remind IHIM members of is that one of the greatest benefits to you in being a part of this community is the connections that you make with one another. And so that's an aside. But as it relates to today's conversation, I know it's not the most comfortable topic. And so it is my goal to create space where we feel as comfortable as we can with one another in our 5-minute introduction. And if there's nothing else that you take away from this exercise, I want you to think about how easy it is for you to resonate with the fact that while you belong to a number of different group identities, you might be a mom, or you might be, you might be a part of a number of different communities. However, you're able to separate yourself from some of the assumptions from what people might assume about you by being a part of that group. But sometimes what happens, particularly when you're on social media, as we're talking about today, is you see someone make a post and you automatically assume that because of the position that they have, you make a number of other assumptions about what they may think and feel about you, about the situation. And so I just wanted to start our conversation today with exercising our ability to think about the people that we're engaging with in a more complex way. And so I've charged you with being a bit vulnerable at the start of this session and sharing some information about yourself with one another. And so for those of you who haven't been with us for our other conversations, I'll give you some context in terms of my background and why I was invited to lead us in this conversation. And so I am what I call a career educator on all topics related to HR management, talent management, executive coaching, and intercultural management. And particularly unique to this group, for a number of years, I served as one of the key players at the national level, ACHE, and creating career resources for healthcare leaders like yourself. And so I think the unique perspective that I bring to this conversation is that my day-to-day involves me being in conversation with people at every career level, from students and entry-level professionals who are just trying to enter into the healthcare profession, to executives who are making the decisions day in and day out that impact all of our lives. And so I'm glad that we did the poll, because you all are a bit of a quiet group, but that's okay. because that's a form of diversity that we don't think about, right? Is how we think. And so what you're seeing me, or how we think and how we engage in conversations like this. And so what you're seeing pop up on your screen is what the group thinks to the core question here. Is it okay for me to engage in political debate online? I do want to invite someone who said, so surprisingly, no one totally agreed, but I want to invite someone who strongly disagree or disagree just in 1 minute, if you can share with us what your reasoning was for disagreeing with the statement. So anyone at all, you could just open your mic, but just why did you disagree?
I'll volunteer, Rachel. This is not the more
Oh,
popular side.
thank you.
No problem. I don't talk a lot of politics at work just because I try to keep the peace as a leader. I'm not saying that's the best way to do it, but just try to keep controversy low, get everybody working together as a team. That's my thoughts behind it.
Okay, and that's fair. I think that's that's probably the perspective that a number of people who choose not to engage into political conversation. So thank you for breaking the ice, Sean. How about if there's a number of you who are neutral on the topic, which I perceive that to mean maybe sometimes yes, other times not. I'm interested in hearing from one of you. Is there anyone who was neutral on the topic who feels comfortable sharing?
Hi, everyone. My name is Moses Salami. I was one of the ones that voted neutral. I think for me, I'm kind of like with Sean in the sense that I try to avoid it. But I think depending on your relationships with certain people, sometimes open discourse about certain topics might be enlightening on both sides. But I really try to pick and choose because, you really don't want to have a conversation with someone that could get heated or, mess up the work atmosphere. So that's why I said neutral on it. But generally, I'm more like Sean.
Yeah, Moses, I totally agree. I wish it was some other way, but the fact of the matter is we are in a polarized society that is generally seeming to grow more and more polarized. And so the fear that most of us have is that if I say something that someone else disagrees with, is there going to be some kind of retaliation in one way or the other? And so here's something that I'm just going to share my screen briefly with you as something to think about. These are just some guidelines, for today's conversation, but also I think whenever you're entering conversations with which you feel there's some kind of heightened sensitivity, here are a couple best practices to keep in mind, right? I encourage everyone to choose curiosity over judgment. And I think you can replace judgment with, a number of things. But the bottom line is the belief is that you cannot remain curious and judgmental at the same time. A lot of times, if to Moses's point, someone says something we don't agree with, and biologically, it's how our brains work. We just shut down and stop listening to the person. And we think of all of the reasons why we don't agree. And so being aware of that biological trigger is important, because that awareness is how you can allow yourself space to ask questions, clarifying questions, because just like in our exercise that we know people may make assumptions about us that aren't quite accurate, we do the same thing in conversations like this. As leaders, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment, but there's a different call, and sometimes I answer the question like Moses, that it depends, because for today's leaders, I hate to break it to you, but based on survey evaluations from millennials and Gen Y, silence sends a message. So, where I know that that's been kind of our old school way of thinking of, there are certain topics I just stay away from. Sometimes silence sends a message. And so we'll talk a little bit about that later as well, about what do we do when we feel that even our silence is sending a message, an unintended message. I always encourage people to listen from the we, and then recognizing the similarities, the humanity that we all have, but speaking from the why just recognizes that the lens I see from centers around the unique experiences that I have. And so these are just some general guidelines that I think, are helpful in entering a conversation like this for us to keep in mind for today. And if there are, other things that you have found as a leader that help you to enter some of these more sensitive conversations in an effective way, I invite you to write them in the chat. So just best practices for creating spaces where people feel included and safe to speak up on their perspective. So why are we even having this conversation today? Well, I brought up at the start some of the things that are going on around the globe that are triggering, politically driven conversations, not just at work, but very much so online. And, it matters. I don't know if you are aware of this, but when you look at your total lifespan, you will spend a good chunk of your life, 25% is the estimate that varies depending on us all in our career paths. I would say for healthcare leaders, it may be closer to 30 and 35%, but we all spend about 25% of our lives at work, which changes the magnitude of importance of these conversations because, to not be able to show up as yourself, to not be able to speak comfortably about your perspective, studies have shown the impact and the detriment to one's health, that happens. And so more and more, you're going to see increases of, calls to figure out ways that we can have conversations about even these tough topics in a meaningful way. And so a good place, I think, to start, let's go ahead and dive right in and say, we're on social media, you're thinking about a post or sharing a story that you're interested in getting perspective on, but you're not quite sure, what the response may be from some of your peers who you are connected with. And so let's pause, because this is where it depends, that for me, this is where it splits. It splits on the why. Why are you using social media? And so I'll invite everyone here, whether you write it in the chat or you can feel free to open up your mic. What are the primary reasons that you can speak for yourself, or just you imagine? What do people use social media for? What's the purpose? And you can even just, if you're unsure, you can speak even for yourself. This is an easy one. There's no right or wrong. Staying in touch with distant friends. Yes, thank you, Mark. Is integral for leaders like yourself who are so busy. I know I'm in Chicago, which, connections are everything here, but, it's the same across the globe, that your career and opportunities are heavily driven by the connections that you have. But most of us don't have time to regularly pick up the phone and, regularly email. And so social media is a great way to stay in touch with distant friends and colleagues. Laura says she uses it to promote what she's doing at her hospital. Just for general human connection. I'm seeing a lot of, yes, I agree. These are all great reasons. So I'm going to share, you all touched on many of them, but I'll share my screen again from a professional standpoint, what I tend to see in terms of the purposes for social media. So for most people, this is our why. There are people who are using it to attract talent, to, as Laura said, to share what's going on at my organization for various reasons, right? It's maintaining, your brand, perhaps, it's building credibility, it's to remain someone said their personal connections, but I think it's professional contacts as well when you're thinking about LinkedIn. Oh, and well, here's one that I will add, that no one is going to say this in the chat, but you have to be aware that there are individuals out here who are commenting and who are posting things because they're looking to get a reaction. That is the reality. And, as the conversation will go on, you'll see that I'm not the kind of presenter who won't say the things that are that are just the real world that we live in. And so if you haven't, if you haven't heard the use of that term before, trolling, it just means people who are literally just looking to start something, as they say where I'm from. They're just looking to start something, and get people's emotions riled up on social media. And so if ever and whenever you find yourself, and in just a bit, we're going to go through some very practical examples of how this can happen. When you are online and it happens, you see a post, maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's a friend, but someone says something and you're just completely taken aback. I think you have to pause, and whatever you wrote in the chat in terms of why you're using social media, ask yourself, what is your purpose? Because that's where the split for me happens, where it depends. So keep in mind what you said your reason is, and you may have specific questions that relate to you as we keep going. So what I'm getting at when I say it depends is the person who is an advocate, for a group, who perhaps is a politician, and even organizational leaders, there are different considerations and responsibilities that you have that someone who does not have that same leadership capacity may not have to, be concerned about. Now, that doesn't mean if you're not in a leadership role, so to speak, that it doesn't matter what you do on social media, but there are different considerations that you will want to keep in mind. And so you're going to see a second poll pop up for you right now. I want you to guess the answer to this next question. And so the question you should see popping up, it says, companies run social media background checks on potential new hires. What do you think? Is that true or is that false? Companies run social media background checks on their new hires. What do you think?
I will
Laura.
say, yeah, I was just going to say, I think if they don't do it formally, all of them are doing it informally.
Yeah, break it down for folks. What do you mean when you say informally?
Well, I mean, I know that as soon as someone says to me, we're in a smaller rural community, and so somebody will say, we've got a new candidate that's been a nurse for 20 years, and first thing, oh, what's their name? First thing I do is I go on there and I look and see, what they're like, what they put out there. And it's amazing some of the things you do find on there. Now our company has told us, that's really not the best idea, but I think you can tell a lot by somebody on what they do or don't post on their social media.
And many of us would agree. Nowadays, when you meet someone, and let's say it's even a professional group like ACAG's National Congress each year, people don't ask me for my business card anymore after I present. They say, what's your LinkedIn? Or, what are one of your social media handles? That is the direction. And so I think, Laura, your comment is spot on, that whether they're admitting it or not, maybe whether or not they're following their the HR protocol and doing so, people are looking you up online. And that's not to say that it's the exclusive decision they make. It's not how they exclusively make their decision on if they're going to partner with you, if they're going to contact you for hire, but please know that they are taking it into consideration. And even if it's not something controversial that you're posting about yourself or politically driven, if your presence online doesn't align with how you are branding yourself individually, unfortunately, they're probably going to, your digital footprint is what's going to more heavily resonate. And so, to Laura's point here, companies do, in fact, it is true that companies do even formally have, partnerships and, packages where they can even view components of social media where you think you've removed it or made it private, or it's an interesting feedback that I get sometimes from people where they say, yeah, I do just say and post whatever I want on my social media, but it's freedom of speech. I don't join anyone. I don't add anyone to my account who isn't a friend. But guess what? your friends and friends of friends, they'll screenshot what you say, and it goes around. So you can put all the privacy settings in place that you like, but things that you say and do online, it can come back to bite you, even if your settings are set to private, because there's nothing that stops people from screenshotting things that you post and say and do. And this statistic I'm sharing with you here, to Laura's point, 34% of employers said that social media helps them to decide whether to contact potential clients. It's not all, but that, I'm telling you, I've been having this conversation with people for a while, particularly on LinkedIn, and every year this number goes up in the level of importance that social media has for employers that are considering hiring. So before we jump into specific scenarios to talk through potential methods of what to do, I do just have a couple of things that I want to recommend that you consider, right, as we're talking through some of these scenarios. And I'm going to share my screen with you again here. So first point of consideration is just make sure that how you're sharing and engaging, that it gives yourself room to grow over time. And you know what I mean by that is, think about what you believed, 10 or 15 years ago. Is it the same as what you think now? Chances are it's not. And chances are what you think and believe 10 to 15 years from now is going to be different. And so if the way that you're engaging on social media, doesn't give you room to grow, you just may want to think twice about it, because it is the unfortunate truth that pictures and videos, they just last forever. And we're seeing more and more now that we're in the time where social media is it's been around now for quite some time. We're seeing how people engaged years ago coming back to bite them. And it's not even that we just grow individually. Even if your views don't change, what is socially acceptable to say and do evolves. Do you ever have old school movie nights in your house? If you go back and watch movies that are even 5, 7 years old, 10 years old, things that are said about groups of culture, about the LGBTQ plus community, is just what is accepted in ways the ways that we're referring to each other. That just changes in terms of what's acceptable over time. And so you just want to be keeping this in mind as you engage online, having your face and name associated with varying conversations. The second thing, there's another question that I'll have you, and again, these polls are completely anonymous in terms of how you answer. I'll say that at the onset, but I like to do them because it's a bit of a touchy topic, so people don't always feel comfortable speaking up verbally how they feel about these topics. I just want to ask you, how would you rate your level of cultural competence? And by that, cultural competence, and the way that I use it is your ability to engage with varying groups of comfort. It's not just your ability, but your comfort, and when you're in settings where perhaps you're the one of the only, right, from your community, just being honest about where do you stand, where do you feel on, and I'll wait a minute or two because we still have a couple people who haven't responded, but just where would you rate yourself? Cultural competence, what do you say? All right, I'm going to share with you the results. So I'm pointing this out so that you know that if you don't quite feel like you have arrived when it comes to your cultural competence, you're not alone, because not a single person in this room rated themselves as an expert, as in they all had it figured out. And spoiler alert, please don't be offended to those of you who wrote 3s and 4s, but part of my background that I didn't share earlier is I'm a qualified facilitator of the intercultural development inventory assessment tool. And one thing that I know for a fact is that people tend to overestimate where they are on their cultural competence journey, meaning whereas they may rate themselves as, highly competent when it comes to cultural competency, when you talk to others who may encounter them from diverse groups that are different than theirs, people may not rate them in the same way. And that's the truth. That's not just for any particular group. I'm not specifically speaking to, white people who are participating right now. This is true even for me and for anyone, regardless of your cultural background. Studies show that we all just tend to think that we're a little more cultural competent than we are. And so I want to pose that question to the group. Why do you think that? Why do you think we have a tendency to overestimate our cultural competency, outside of the fact that we tend to think we're probably more competent in everything, right, than we are? That's kind of Midwest culture. We think we're better. We're better drivers, even than we are. I know my husband would attest to that for me. Any thoughts on this? Why do you think that, as a nation, we tend to feel that we're a little more culturally competent when we're engaging with groups of culture than we are? No thoughts on this? Okay, well, I will share some of the reasons. There are a number of reasons, but in general, there aren't a lot of nuanced ways that we, are introduced to, our nation's history, our foundational experience. We tend to, we think, thanks for your thoughts, Mark, that he's saying that, recent attention around racial inequity has helped people to grow in their awareness. But I think what he's saying is it's to my point that, racial inequity is just a part, the complex history has just been a part of our history for forever. But some people, it hasn't really been required of us. It hasn't been required of us to have it on our radar until recent years. You could be, a teacher, a lawyer, a CEO, and never have been required to take or have any really comprehensive DEI, education to help you to understand the perspectives and the lens, of people who are different from you. When you think about the fact that we are, one of the diverse nations around the world, you think about how that just sets us up to be in a detriment in that area. And so I'm sharing this because, misunderstandings are a big piece of what happens when you see those, those political debate conversations going wrong. And a lot of times when we talk about groups of culture or people being different, we automatically think ethnicity, but ways that we can be different go far beyond how things that we can physically see. You write in the chat if you can think of all the ways that we can be complex as people, age and gender. These are things that sometimes you can see, but even beyond that, there's social economic status, it's your education level, it's career level, it's, your geographic, location. All of these things influence how you, going back to that foundational question, we talked about in the beginning, I am, but I am not. All of these variances impact our, what we call in the DEI world, the intersectionality of who we are as individuals. A big way that we are all diverse that we often don't think about is in just how we think, how we process things like conflict. And so there is a conflict style assessment that I really like, because it basically says that we all process conflict. And to be clear, when I'm saying conflict, I don't mean a fight. I don't even mean an argument between people in the office. Conflict arises when in the office, there's something someone says that rubs you the wrong way, or there's a bit of a debate on a topic that presents some kind of conflict for you, that feeling of unease that happens in workspaces. And so, so the experts say that we all process conflict in two very distinct ways. Either we believe that your approach should be to be either direct or indirect. And then the other tier or the other axis of that is we believe that you should either be emotionally restrained or emotionally expressive. And so explicitly what I mean by that is if you're a person who's in that top left quadrant where you think that the best way to approach conflict, so you see a post on social media, someone is saying something that you find offensive, right? Because it's referencing a group that you belong to in a negative way. And your approach, you're in the top left quadrant, the discussion tier, where you think the way to approach conflict is to be very direct, but emotionally restrained. Any of, and I'm not just speaking to leaders, it can be anyone in the group. Can anyone see how that approach can, how it might help or how it can hurt in situations of conflict, or you're looking online, you have a situation of unease from a colleague or friend in your network. How might being direct and emotionally restrained, so we're talking we're talking about that top left tier right now, how might that present an issue for people? And I'm waiting a minute or two because I hear some tapping, so people might be writing thoughts. So I think one thing to understand is that regardless of your style of dealing with conflicts, it's not good or bad, but what I want you to draw from looking at this is we all just have different ideas about how it should be done, so to speak, how we should handle this situation. And so if you're a person in the discussion tier and you're direct and emotionally restrained, and I can speak from a practical example because a lot of times healthcare executives who I coach fall in this tier, is, it serves these individuals well that they are direct, because usually the messaging it's clear what they're saying to someone, but the emotional restraint is sometimes a barrier that prevents them from building trust and relationship with their with their employees or with their team, because they are it may send the message that they don't care. It doesn't mean that that's accurate, or it doesn't mean that you don't care, but that it's all about how you may be coming across, to people that you're communicating with. And so same thing applies when you are, I think the gap is even, there's a bigger gap or room for error when you are on social media, right? Because people don't have anything to go on. They see whatever your profile picture is, but they don't have a chance to hear your tone and the context, or, they can't see the piece of the article that resonated with you most, or the lines that you, that the reason that you shared it. And so, they're going off maybe assumptions of what you sharing this comment or this article means. And so it's important for you to be aware. And oftentimes people, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through each individual quadrant in detail, I am going to provide the link to an article that talks in detail about each of these styles for you all to have as a resource afterwards. But one thing I will point out is for people who are emotionally restrained in their delivery and in their talk about conflict, I guarantee you those are the people more than likely who in that poll question, they said, no, we don't talk about politics in the workspace ever under any circumstance, because it's probably going to evoke emotions. And usually people who are emotionally restrained, they feel in situations of conflict. It doesn't mean this is how they are all the time, but in situations of conflict, they feel that if you're too emotionally expressive, it's kind of wasting time. It's not bringing us to resolution. Whereas when you have people on the other side or the other tier, hang on, I'm gonna sip water. Okay. See, you guys are so quiet. You're stressing my vocal cords. But for people who are emotionally expressive, they're coming from a complete different paradigm. They think that the way to make progress in situations of conflict is to be emotionally expressive. It's okay if we're yelling or we're arguing. Let's just get all of our feelings out on the table. That's how you really make progress. And so anyone here who has siblings, who has a spouse, I always like you, it's easier for us sometimes to grasp these concepts when we think about not so much coworkers, but we think about the people closest to us. Chances are there are people in your life who are coming to your mind right now as we talk about this. You're saying, oh, that explains why this person communicates with me this way when they're a situation of conflict. You just have a different understanding about what resolution should look like in these situations. And so I think that difference of perspective and approach is important to keep in mind. Okay, so let's do, I want to be mindful of the time. And so we're going to go through a couple just sample scenarios. These are all based off real life situations, excuse me, that I'm aware of. And so we're going to talk about them. Sorry, let me go to, okay. So these are the guidelines I want you to consider. You should see it popping up on your screen any minute now, but these are the questions I want you to consider with each scenario. And we're gonna play a round of, could I get fired for that is the question at hand. Could this get me in trouble? So these are the questions that I want you to think about as you're reflecting on each scenario. And how you should approach it. Think about what is your motive here? What's the real motive in your response, or how your response to someone or your share? Think about who can view your post or your comments, which, spoiler alert, I've already told you the answer to this. No matter how private your account is, the real answer of who can view what you're doing and saying on social media is everybody, potentially. And then how many varying perspectives may be viewing what you're sharing. And then the last thing I want you to think about is, what's the relationship that you have with the person? It never ceases to amaze me the level of emotion and energy that sometimes we, evoke into conversations with people online who we've never met, may never see again, or maybe never meet in person. And, we can let them ruin our whole day. Okay, so we're gonna jump into the first scenario. Let me see, it's not jumping to the next slide. I think we froze here. Hang on, let me refresh my share. If it keeps remaining froze, I'll just verbally say, there we go. Okay, so we're just talking through, kind of what would you do / could I be fired for that? That's what we're talking about with these scenarios. Okay, so in this scenario, there's a woman who just closed landed a big new client, and she gets excited and she posts about it on Instagram. You can write your thoughts in the chat. What do you think? Could this person be fired for that? Can you be fired for jumping the gun and getting too excited? Particularly to my leaders, what do you think? Should this person be reprimanded? To make an Instagram post about Sean says yes, this person could be fired. Any other thoughts on this? Yes, if there were any confidential agreements. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Then this is actually a real one of the more common scenarios that has happened, is people just being too open about situations that have that are under a confidentiality with companies coming out. That's a very common one. And possibly Moses is saying possibly reprimanded, fired, not sure. Yes. And so in the scenario I'm basing this one out, Moses, the person actually was let go from their company. The next one, okay, and we've talked around this one, but explicitly, the insensitive coworker. So your coworker shares a news article with a headline that you find offensive because it relates to you in connection with your religious group affiliation. What do you think? Is there Is your coworker risking potentially being fired? Should you say or do anything about this? What do you think? What are your thoughts on this? Any thoughts? You have a coworker who shares a news article that you find offensive or polarizing. No. Bob is saying no. Moses is saying no. Yeah, in most cases that I'm aware of, there is not, it doesn't result in a person being fired. But I think it's worth talking about, and thinking about as a leader, because even if it's not something that you could be fired for, thinking of the implications of what message you may be sending to people who you report to people you're partnering with. A lot of times people, and I think 2016 showed a lot of us that it's not safe to make assumptions where people stand politically, religiously. And I think it's just dangerous, territory to make blanketed statements and shares. To our point about being considered for candidacy earlier, you don't want to run the risk of being eliminated for an opportunity, based off of, what you're posting. Another one that comes up, I think very frequently. And so this one is a freedom of speech comment. This is something I hear a lot from people that, hey, it's our right to be able to say what we want. It's my profile. It's not the company's. It doesn't have anything to do with them. And so, yeah, I make posts talking about how much I hate my job all the time, but it's no surprise. I have a really good rapport with my boss. My boss knows that my boss hates it here too. No one at the company loves their job. It's my profile. It's nothing to do. It's no secret. What do you think? Can I be fired for this? For talking about how much I hate my job on social media? What do you think? Maybe not fired. Sean said, maybe not fired, but it can't help. Okay, I appreciate that. Bob said no. Any other thoughts on this? You know what? You can be fired. People have been fired for talking about, anything that a company can make a case for the fact that you are showcasing them or their brand negatively. You could be fired for that. Even in a scenario like I described, that everybody knows, it's no secret. Your boss talks about how they hate it. I mean, no one in this group, everyone here is experienced enough to know a lot of times what's in writing just sticks much more than what is verbally explained. And so be mindful of that, making comments about how much you hate your job or your organization. Tara says it depends on employees' history with other behaviors. Absolutely, right? It's not, I think that this is certainly one of those, it depends. It's certainly to the discretion of, your company, but most companies, certainly here in Illinois, is an at-will state, meaning that it's really difficult to prove wrongful, termination to begin with. Company, when you work in an at-will state, it just basically means companies can kind of let you go for little, or it's not saying that that's what they want, but they don't have to have it's not a lot of proof that they need, that they have merit to let you go. And so I think you just want to be mindful of that. Now, to Tara's point, in most cases, will you get fired for this? I think in most cases it's what Sean said, that maybe you won't get fired, but it's probably not going to put you in the running for, to be promoted. And, will your company always see it? But it is a risk that you want to be aware of, that people have been fired for less, for speaking uncomplimentary about their company on social media. So you want to be mindful about that. I want to give space for some questions from you. Maybe there's a sticky scenario you aren't sure about when you saw the title of this session, talking politics online. Maybe there's something very specific that you have in mind that you wanted to put on the table. I like to be very intentional about creating space for these conversations to happen in an organic way. I do think that that's one of the biggest value adds to to membership with IHIN. How often do you get healthcare leaders in shared space where you can talk about these things? And so if there was a scenario that anyone had in mind or something that they were processing that motivated you to participate today, I do want to give space for you to share. Maybe there's a scenario even that's coming to your mind that you have been in social media wise and you weren't sure how to handle. I invite you to share or type in the chat for us to discuss as a group. And as some of you may be thinking, you can type in the chat, you can open up your mic, because I'm comfortable anyway. But going back to those foundational questions, for the sake of time, I didn't, go deeply into discussing each one of them. But, I started off by saying, you really got to reflect to yourself and just think about what's your motive, right? In a post you're making, or how you're responding, because I'm going to tell you this, I don't know of many scenarios where someone gets into heated debate on social media with a stranger and they change their mind. I think social media is a great place to, to read comments. It's interested to try to see how people are talking about topics and, just helping to expose you to other worldviews and perspectives that your colleagues may have that you weren't aware of that are out there. But I just think, it could be a thankless activity to really try to, convert someone to think in the same way that you do via social media. I know of very few cases, I don't know of any cases, honestly, where people got into a debate or argument and the person walked away and said, you know what, I really thought about what that stranger said to me on social media. And, I'm changing my mind in my life. So just thinking about what it is that you really want to gain from the discussion and from your presence. And, I asked the question earlier, what's your individual motive for being online and for being on different platforms? And if one of the motivations is, building your brand, being seen as a leader, is, recruiting diverse talent to your organization, I do think that there is a call for you to be more intentional about how you're showing up. Moses, I'm seeing your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. So at my prior organization, I managed, I was the director of marketing. So I managed all of our social media platforms. So as you can imagine, through COVID, through, Black Lives Matter movement based on, around George Floyd, there's a lot of chatter, a lot of comments and different things. So one of the things that we were noticing were, a lot more of the employees, being a little bit more vocal, whether it was things that related to COVID, things that related to Black Lives Matter movement and their personal feelings and beliefs. And between my team as well as senior leadership, our CEO, we first had to talk about what were the next steps that we wanted to do to, one, not cause any tension between people in the organization, and also on the PR end, not to present the organization in a bad light, if you will. So at first it was really one, letting everyone know what the social media policy is for the organization and that you are representatives of the organization. But I think my CEO also looked at it as an opportunity to also talk about what is the stance of the organization, because as you mentioned before, being silent can also lead to it being a statement indirectly, whether you want that or not. So I think doing those two things, I think, kind of help educating the staff on, we have to respect everyone's ideals and beliefs and be open, but also not to really engage in arguments on social media. I think kind of really helped us as well. And then obviously on some more of the technical end, sometimes HR chimed in certain situations where, maybe this wasn't the best conversation to have about your employer and certain platforms and rooms.
Yeah, Moses, I appreciate you talking about a very real challenge that is happening. It's happening as we speak. And, I think that there's this unfair pressure for leaders to do the right thing and say all the right thing, even in these unprecedented situations, right? And so I'm going to share with you a very interesting statistic that, in an evaluation by world leaders in diversity, equity, and inclusion. They put out, they polled HR leaders all across the nation. And after the murder of George Floyd in 2020, something like 80% of HR managers, directors, and above said that their companies put in place, made statements or made some kind of new commitment to DEI. 80%, that's almost, that's almost all. 80% of companies made some kind of commitment. Now, I'll allow you to guess in the chat, what percentage of those HR professionals felt like their company was actually going to move on, make any kind of action, follow through on the action? What percentage would you guess if you had to? So we had almost all of the companies surveyed have made some kind of commitment. Mark, yep, your numbers. If 15, it was a little better than what you're thinking, Mark, but 20%, pretty low, right? Almost none, 1 or 2 out of 10. So if it was everyone on this call, it would be 1 or 2 of us believe that your company was going to make action. Leaders, if you're not catching while I'm sharing this statistic, it matters. It matters for the trust, right, that your staff has in you as an organization. It is almost, I think it's kind of a toss-up, so I wouldn't want to be like tweeted or quoted on this, but I almost think that it's worse to make a statement or a commitment and not follow through on it than to not make a statement at all. And again, I'm not, this is Rachel speaking, I'm not quoting any statistic, but I just think in terms of the morale, a lot of conversations about creating productive cultures, inclusive culture, really it's not what happens when these big, world events happen that we're all trying to figure out. It's really about the day-to-day, how you build trust, how do you create a space? Because to Moses's point, I would never extend my services to say I'm going to help people write statements in situations like this. I probably wouldn't sleep for 2 weeks trying to think of the perfect wording, because the truth is, no matter how perfectly or eloquently you put together these statements, you're not going to make everybody happy. And I think it's important to understand as leaders and, as DEI professionals, it's my opinion that that's not what creating an inclusive culture means. It doesn't mean you make everybody happy, but what it means is that you create space where it's okay for people have the tools and are educated in a way where they can show up and they can be who they are and they can express their opinions respectfully and not feel like they're going to be retaliated against. That's what the goal is. And so when so I just think that it's kind of unfair pressure to put on yourselves if you are trying to know the perfect way to respond to situations. The truth is we're figuring it out as we go. We're doing the best that we can. And so I really encourage you with your leadership teams, if not to get into, unless you have a strategic plan of action that you're planning to make with these statements. If you start to just put out statements every time that there's some kind of controversial event going on, and that's not to downplay the murders that happened in 2020 or any murders in any capacity. But if you don't have an action plan is what I'm getting at, and you just start making statements with every event that happens, then you are potentially setting yourself up for the reverse outcomes that you probably want. We probably have time for 1 or 2 thoughts or questions. And again, I do believe in the collective intelligence of this space. So even if there's just a thought and not necessarily a question that that is coming to mind or an experience that anyone has had in the group, we've intentionally made these conversations 90 minutes so that you have that community to be able to kind of bounce thoughts and ideas off one another. So I'll give just a minute or two if there's any thoughts that anyone wanted to share. I certainly am interested in hearing if there's one takeaway, what if there's the main takeaway or thing that's resonating with you from today's conversation, write that in the chat and to that note, because I know that there are some people who do have to run or do a hard stop. You are healthcare professionals, perhaps arguably the most busy people that I've ever worked with. I will now just put, I did just drop a link in the chat. I'm interested in hearing your feedback. The Career Development Committee will see these results. We're interested in hearing your thoughts on the conversation that we had today. It's just a quick, I think, 5 questions. So please take a minute to fill out that evaluation form for us before you leave. I've just put it in the chat. Thanks for reminding. Oh, Mark, thank you. Okay, so Mark is saying one thing that resonated or that he's remembering from this conversation is that silence does send a message. And, you know, one story that I didn't share that I think is an example of that. So there is a team member at my organization who is a part of the LGBTQ plus community. And so as an example of sometimes silence sends a message, he just talked about there was a political situation recently, if you recall, where there was, you know, Florida is always in the media. And so there is a political figure who Disney, you know, it came out that Disney had a big backing of this individual who is, you know, anti the LGBTQ plus community, is how my colleagues saw this individual, and it made the Disney employees who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, it dropped their morale. It made them think differently about their corporation because they felt that they had power to influence this political figure, or, you know, they felt they had power that they didn't exercise. And so I think to your point, you know, it's Mark, I'm bringing that up because it's not about whether or not you necessarily agree with the employees from Disney or this political figure. You know, many of you may know even the situation I'm speaking to, but you know, I'm keeping it high level because the thing to think about here is no matter what, you know, Disney's leadership position is, there was an assumption made by their staff about where they stood because they didn't see them exercising their power in the way that they thought. And Disney never came out and made a statement one way or the other. So I think that that's a good example. Yeah, Bob sounds like one of the ones who said, nope, we don't talk politics. He said silence is golden. Thank you for the facilitation. Yeah, and so I will be sharing these slides, and I would be remiss if I didn't conclude by reminding you that at the national level, there are a number of career development resources available to you at ache.org. One of the tiers of their career education that resources revolve all around is personal branding. And so, you know, we talked high level about some things to take into consideration, whether it's talking politics or whether it's just building your brand in general, or how potential employers might be using social media to make decisions about you. But if you know, based on our conversation, if you really thought about the fact that building your brand is not something that you put a lot of attention around to date, I do recommend that you review the career resources that are available to you complimentary because you are a member of IHIN at ache.org. And in the slides that I share, Sean, Rodney, if you're still here, when I send the slides after today's session, I'll be sure to link some of the key resources that I think can bring value to participants. And so, you know, the thought that I will just leave you with is, you know, if nothing else, I do hope that you're walking away from this conversation just, thinking less about the what. I think we really get hung up in these political situations on who's wrong, who's wrong, who's right. But I think when it comes to relationship and just building and maintaining meaningful conversations, it's about listening. It's about at least just trying to understand the perspective of other individuals, like we started off today's session doing with this exercise. I think when we, humanize and just realize that our experience is our own, based on our life experiences, but there are other valid experiences that people have that may be much different. And so I'll leave you with one of my favorite quotes of all time from Malcolm X, where he said, "We need more light about each other because light creates understanding, understanding creates love, love creates patience, and patience creates unity." So thank you for allowing me to lead this conversation. Sean, I'll turn the floor back over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. It was an amazing event. I know I learned a lot. Thank you for your time and commitment. Let me share my screen real fast. A special thank you to our IHAN administrator, Corey Jose, who does a lot of behind the scenes work to make our organization run smoothly. Before we close out today's meeting, be sure to complete the evaluation of today's program by clicking the evaluation link, which was included in the chat feature. Additionally, I wanted to read and share with you our upcoming events. Show that to you now. We have the Promises and Perils of Precision Medicine, which is coming in July. We're setting a date for that now. We have the Indiana Innovation and High Performance the Summit, which is hosted by HEBE. That's July 13th. We hope you join us for that. We have the building of part of that is building the hospitals tomorrow and green hospitals and healthcare. We have the IHAN annual awards, which is September 15th. We also have understanding implicit bias and leading information safety. Please remember to log into your ACHA profile and enter your qualified education credits for this event. Again, thank you for your time. We value your membership and look forward to providing opportunities to invest in your professional development. Thank you, everyone.